Good morning and welcome to the third Sunday of Lent. A reading from the Gospel of John. Just before the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and in the temple he found people selling cattle and sheep and pigeons, and the money changers sitting at their counters there. Making a whip out of some cord, he drove them all out of the temple, cattle and sheep as well, scattered the money changers' coins, knocked their tables over, and said to the pigeon sellers, "Take all this out of here, and stop turning my Father's house into a market." Then his disciples remembered the words of Scripture, "Zeal for your house will devour me." The Jews intervened and said, "What sign can you show us to justify what you have done?" Jesus answered, "Destroy this sanctuary, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews replied, "It has taken 46 years to build this sanctuary. Are you going to raise it up in 3 days? But he was speaking of the sanctuary that was his body. And when Jesus rose from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the Scripture and the words he had said. During his stay in Jerusalem for the Passover, many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he gave. But Jesus knew them all and did not trust himself to them. He never needed evidence about any man. He could tell what a man had in him. The Gospel of the Lord. This is one of the rare stories from the New Testament that appears in all 4 Gospels. Mark, Matthew and Luke place the event in Holy Week, whereas John, whose account we have just heard, places the event at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry. Jesus had gone up to Jerusalem for the great feast of Passover. Passover celebrates the great liberation of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, and the focal point of the feast is the temple where the Passover lambs will be slaughtered. In the outer courtyard, merchants were selling animals for the sacrifices and changing coins. Everyday money in Jewish currency couldn't be used in the temple. The money changers carried out an essential service in changing the Greek and Roman coins with their blasphemous imagery and captions. All of these pursuits were necessary for the daily functioning of the temple, and more especially at Passover. While all this trade was legitimate, its location wasn't. The temple was supposed to be a house of prayer. Jesus' ministry, especially evident in John's Gospel, is firmly rooted in love for his Father, Abba, and zeal for his Father's house. For the festival of Passover, Jesus is coming to what is distinctly his own, because this temple is his Father's house, the place of Jewish worship, the place where God was encountered, where sacrifices were offered, where sins were forgiven, and the covenant renewed. More than anything else, for our Jewish brothers and sisters, it was the place where God dwelt among his people. Whatever else it was never intended to become a marketplace. John's Gospel is a gospel about signs. All that Jesus says and does points to a beyond, another deeper meaning. Take everything as literal and we'll miss what Jesus is truly about. I think that's why Jesus' initial invitation to future disciples in this gospel is, "Come and see." Jesus' action in the temple is premeditated and radical. Remember, if the temple's trade is shut down, the temple itself is in danger. His cleansing of the temple is not just a cleansing of the trade being conducted there. Driving out the animals needed for the sacrifices and to shut down the exchange of foreign coinage is in effect to shut down the temple as a place of worship. The cleansing of the temple is a challenge to the whole temple establishment and the religious system it promoted. Jesus' action is a declaration that the function of the temple as the place of covenant renewal and reconciliation between God and Israel is henceforth null and void. It just wasn't working anymore. Jesus had come to reveal to us the true face of God. He had come to his own people, and the majority did not accept him. The temple, the place where God dwelt among his people, wasn't accessible anymore. The Holy of Holies was cut off from all except the high priest, and even then he could enter only on specific occasions. God's presence among his people was being sidelined, covered over by temple rules and regulations. God had become a distant God for his people. So take this passage on the literal level and we are going nowhere. Just like those who asked Jesus for a sign to show that he has authority for what he has just done. They don't understand that he is not talking about the destruction of the physical temple that surrounds them and a rebuilding project that will only take 3 days. He is talking about the temple of his own body. Jesus was speaking on an entirely different level altogether. This passage shows us the necessity of going beyond the literal and mundane to arrive at the elusive and symbolic, as the Jesuit theologian Brendan Byrne reminds us. The disciples who witnessed the cleansing of the temple cannot understand what Jesus does until after their experience of Jesus' death and resurrection. Then they will finally understand its deeper meaning. Zeal for his Father's house did consume Jesus. The authorities know that he cannot be allowed to live after his actions in the temple, actions which threatened the very institution itself. And those who had the power and authority put him to death, did destroy the temple which was his body. But we know how the story ends, not in destruction, but in resurrection. So, read between the lines of Scripture, the lines of your own life. It's always the best place to find the Lord. Grasp the deeper, non-literal meaning. Churches, shrines, temples, places of worship are important. But when we make them absolute, the centre of everything, watch what happens. When we tabernacle God and make him accessible only in certain places, on certain occasions, and to certain acceptable people to the exclusion of others, it is the beginning of the end. It is a time for cleansing. Jesus' action in the temple challenges all religious practice that turns the Father into a distant God, the property of an elite few, that consigns the presence and revelation of God simply to the realm of the sacred. When the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us, he pointed to the presence of God in the everyday and ordinary, as well as in the sacred and set apart. What drives the entire mission of Jesus is indeed zeal for his Father's house, the world that God loved so much. The temple was supposed to be the place. The world is supposed to be the place where all of us as children of God are at home and feel welcome in our Father's house. Let's finish with a poem by Malcolm Goite, an Anglican priest. It's an invitation to Jesus to enter the temple of my life. Cleansing the temple. Come to your temple here with liberation and overturn these tables of exchange. Restore in me my lost imagination. Begin in me for good the pure change. Come as you came, an infant with your mother, that innocence may cleanse and claim this ground. Come as you came, a boy who sought his father with questions asked and certain answers found. Come as you came this day, a man in anger. Unleash the lash that drives a pathway true. Face down for me the fear, the shame, the danger. Teach me again to whom my love is due. Break down in me the barricades of death and tear the veil in two with your last breath. Blessings on all of you this day and always.